The lightning struck without warning, a jagged bolt of pure electricity that split the August sky and sent 34-year-old Maya Chen crashing to the ground in the middle of nowhere. When she opened her eyes, a stranger with gentle hands was checking her pulse, rain streaming down his face as he shielded her from the storm. She didn't know his name, he didn't know hers. But in that moment, as thunder rolled across the hills of rural Oregon, something more powerful than lightning had just connected them. What happened next wasn't just about surviving the storm. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. It was about two broken souls finding healing in the most unexpected place, about a man who had given up on love learning to trust again, and about a woman running from her past, discovering that sometimes the best shelter isn't a building, it's a person. If stories about second chances and the courage to open your heart again speak to you, we'd love to have you stay with us through this journey. The storm had been building all afternoon across the Cascade foothills, dark clouds stacking like bruises against the summer sky. Maya Chen pressed the accelerator of her Honda Civic, desperate to outrun both the weather and the weight of the conversation she'd just escaped. Her hands trembled on the steering wheel, not from the approaching thunder, but from the words that still echoed in the cramped conference room she'd fled 20 minutes ago. The partnership track requires complete dedication. Maya, we can't have associates who prioritize personal drama over billable hours. She'd spent 6 years climbing the ladder at Brennan Associates, 6 years of 14-hour days and weekends, sacrificed to corporate law. 6 years of believing that if she just worked hard enough, stayed late enough, billed enough hours, she'd finally earn the respect that seemed to come so easily to her male colleagues. But today, when she'd asked for a single afternoon off to attend her grandmother's funeral, the managing partner had made it clear where her priorities should lie. Your grandmother isn't going anywhere, Maya. This merger waits for no one. The funeral had been 3 hours ago. Maya had watched from the cemetery gates through her car window as her cousins carried her grandmother's casket, as her family gathered to say goodbye to the woman who'd raised her, while she sat paralyzed between duty and devotion. In the end, she'd chosen neither. She'd simply driven away, leaving both the funeral and the office behind, her phone buzzing incessantly with messages she couldn't bring herself to answer. Now, as fat raindrops began spattering her windshield, Maya realized she had no idea where she was. The GPS on her phone had lost signal 20 miles back, somewhere around the time she'd turned off Highway 26 onto increasingly narrow mountain roads. She'd been driving on autopilot, letting her subconscious navigate while her mind replayed every moment of professional humiliation, every sacrificed weekend, every relationship that had withered under the demands of her career. The rain intensified suddenly, going from scattered drops to a torrential downpour that overwhelmed her windshield wipers. Maya slowed to a crawl, squinting through the deluge at the winding road ahead. The forest pressed close on both sides, tall Douglas firs swaying ominously in the wind. She needed to find shelter, needed to pull over and wait out the worst of it. That's when she saw the clearing up ahead, a small meadow beside what looked like an old logging road. Maya pulled off the main road, her tires squelching in the soft earth as she drove a few yards into the open space. She killed the engine and sat back, listening to the rain hammer against her roof like 1,000 impatient fingers. Her phone showed no signal and 18 missed calls. Maya stared at the screen, thumb hovering over the power button. She could turn it off completely, could disappear for a few hours and pretend the outside world didn't exist. The thought was both terrifying and liberating. She grabbed her emergency rain jacket from the back seat and stepped out of the car. The storm was magnificent in its fury, lightning flickering in the distance while thunder rolled across the valley like a growling beast. Maya had always loved storms, had spent her childhood watching them from her grandmother's kitchen window while they baked cookies and told stories. Her grandmother, who would never tell another story, who had died alone while Maya sat in the sterile conference room arguing about contract clauses. The guilt hit her like a physical blow, and Maya found herself walking deeper into the meadow, rain soaking through her jacket within seconds. She needed to feel something other than the numbness that had settled over her like a shroud. The storm seemed like penance, like nature's way of washing clean the mistakes of the day. She was standing in the center of the clearing when the world went white. The lightning strike was instant and absolute, a searing column of electricity that connected sky to earth with Maya somewhere in the middle. The last thing she remembered was the smell of ozone and the strange sensation of floating, as if the very atoms of her being had been scattered to the wind. When consciousness returned, it came in fragments, the taste of copper in her mouth, the smell of wet earth and something burning, a steady pressure against her chest, rhythmic and insistent, and a voice deep and calm, cutting through the ringing in her ears. "Come on, breathe. Please breathe." Maya's eyes fluttered open to find a stranger's face hovering above hers, rainwater dripping from dark hair onto her cheek. Kind eyes, the color of storm clouds, focused intently on hers. Strong hands pressed against her chest, and she realized dimly that he was performing CPR. "There you are," he said, relief flooding his voice. "Welcome back." Maya tried to speak but only managed a weak cough. Her body felt strange, disconnected, as if she were inhabiting someone else's skin. The man, her rescuer, helped her sit up slowly, one hand supporting her back. "Easy," he murmured. "You've been unconscious for about 10 minutes. Lightning strike. You're lucky to be alive." Maya blinked up at him, rain still falling steadily around them. He was maybe 40, with the kind of weathered face that spoke of years spent outdoors. His clothes were soaked through, a simple flannel shirt and jeans that had seen better days. He knelt beside her in the mud without seeming to care about the mess. "I'm David," he said. "David Morrison. What's your name?" "Maya," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the rain. "Maya Chen. Maya." He said it carefully, as if testing the weight of it. "That's a beautiful name. Can you move your fingers, your toes?" She flexed experimentally and nodded. Everything seemed to be working, though she felt strangely hollow, as if the lightning had burned away something essential. "We need to get you out of this rain," David said, glancing around the meadow. "My truck's just up the road. Can you walk?" Maya tried to stand and immediately swayed, her legs refusing to support her weight. David caught her easily, his arm sliding around her waist with practiced efficiency. "I've got you," he said simply. As they made their way slowly across the muddy field, Maya caught glimpses of her rescuer. The way he moved with quiet confidence, adapting his pace to match her unsteady steps. The careful way he guided her around puddles and over fallen branches. There was something about him that felt solid, reliable, like a lighthouse in a storm. His truck was an older Ford forest green with a few dents that spoke of honest work rather than careless driving. David helped her into the passenger seat, then jogged around to the driver's side. The interior smelled like sawdust and coffee, and Maya noticed a child's car seat in the back. "Hospital's about 30 minutes from here," David said, starting the engine. "But there's an urgent care clinic closer. How are you feeling? Any chest pain? Difficulty breathing?" Maya shook her head, though the truth was she wasn't sure what she was feeling. Everything seemed muffled, as if she were experiencing the world through thick glass. "I think I'm okay." "How did you find me?" "I was driving home from work when I saw the lightning hit. Pulled over to make sure no one was hurt." He glanced at her with concern. "You were just lying there in the middle of the field. What were you doing out in a storm like this?" The question hung in the air between them, and Maya realized she didn't have a good answer. How could she explain that she'd been running from her life, that she'd chosen a thunderstorm over a conference room, that she'd rather risk lightning than face another day of slow professional suffocation. "I needed some air," she said finally. David didn't press, but she caught him studying her in his peripheral vision. They drove in comfortable silence for several miles, the only sounds the drumming of rain on the roof and the steady rhythm of the windshield wipers. Maya found herself stealing glances at her rescuer, wondering what kind of man stopped on a dangerous road to help a stranger. "You have a child," she said, nodding toward the car seat. "Emma, she's 7. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Pride and something else worry maybe flickered across his features. "She's with her aunt tonight. School night. Just the two of you?" David's hands tightened almost imperceptibly on the steering wheel. "Yeah, just us." Maya sensed the weight behind those simple words, the story that lived in the space between what was said and what wasn't. She recognized the tone because she'd used it herself whenever people asked about her family, her relationships, the life she'd been too busy building a career to actually live. The urgent care clinic sat in a small strip mall between a grocery store and a pizza place, its neon sign casting pink reflections in the puddles of the parking lot. David pulled up close to the entrance and turned off the engine. "I should probably go in with you," he said. "Lightning strike victims can have delayed complications. You might need someone to drive you home afterward." Maya started to protest that she could take care of herself, that she'd been doing it successfully for 34 years, but something in his expression stopped her. This wasn't about her capabilities. This was about his need to see this through, to make sure the stranger he'd pulled back from the edge was truly safe. "Thank you," she said instead. The clinic was nearly empty. Just a tired-looking teenager with his arm in a sling and an elderly woman clutching a tissue box. The receptionist, a woman with kind eyes and graying hair, looked up as they approached the desk. "Lightning strike," David said simply. The woman's eyebrows rose. "How long ago?" "About 45 minutes, Maya replied, surprised that her voice sounded almost normal. "Any loss of consciousness?" "About 10 minutes worth." Within minutes, Maya found herself in an examination room, wearing the hospital gown and connected to various monitoring devices. David had been relegated to the waiting room, but somehow his presence there felt like an anchor, keeping her tethered to something real while the medical staff poked and prodded and asked endless questions. Dr. Patterson, a woman about Maya's age with efficient hands and a reassuring manner, reviewed her test results with professional thoroughness. "Your heart rhythm is stable, and your neurological responses are normal," she said. "No signs of burns or internal injury. You're incredibly lucky, Ms. Chen. Most people don't walk away from a direct lightning strike." "Was it direct?" Maya asked. "Based on your symptoms and the location where you were found, I'd say you experienced what we call a side flash. The lightning probably hit a tree or the ground near you and jumped to your body. Still dangerous, but not usually fatal." Dr. Patterson made some notes on her chart. "I want to keep you for observation for a few hours, just to be safe. Lightning strike victims can develop complications up to 24 hours after the incident." Maya nodded, though part of her wanted to argue, to insist she was fine and could go home. Except she didn't have a home to go to, not really. Just an empty apartment across town that she visited between 16-hour workdays, a sterile space that had never felt like anything more than an expensive storage unit for her belongings. "Is there someone I can call for you?" Dr. Patterson asked. "Family? A significant other?" Maya opened her mouth to say no, then hesitated. There was family technically. Cousins and aunts and uncles who had gathered today to bury the woman who'd raised her. But she'd forfeited the right to lean on them when she'd chosen work over grief, billable hours over saying goodbye. "There's someone in the waiting room," she said finally, David Morrison. He's the one who found me. Dr. Patterson nodded and left to get David. A few minutes later, he appeared in the doorway, his damp hair combed back and his expression carefully neutral. "How are you feeling?" he asked, settling into the plastic chair beside her bed. "Like I've been struck by lightning," Maya said, attempting a weak smile. David chuckled, and the sound was warm and genuine. "Well, technically speaking, you have been." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, listening to the steady beep of the heart monitor and the distant sounds of the clinic. Maya studied her rescuer more carefully now that they were in good light. He had the kind of face that improved with age, lines around his eyes that spoke of laughter and worry in equal measure. His hands were calloused, the hands of someone who worked with tools rather than contracts. "You don't have to stay," Maya said. "I'm sure you have somewhere you need to be." "Emma's at her aunt's house for the night," David replied. "And I'm not in the habit of leaving people alone in hospitals." There was something in his tone that suggested experience with hospital visits, with the particular kind of loneliness that came with medical emergencies. Maya wondered what story lay behind that knowledge but didn't ask. They were still strangers, connected only by circumstance and electricity. "What kind of work do you do?" she asked instead. "I'm a carpenter. Mostly custom furniture, some restoration. Work, nothing fancy, but it pays the bills. You like it?" David considered the question seriously. "I like making things that last. There's something satisfying about taking raw wood and turning it into something beautiful, something useful. Something that will outlive you." Maya thought about her own work, the endless stream of contracts and negotiations and billable hours that evaporated the moment they were complete. When was the last time she'd created something that would outlast the quarterly earnings report? "What about you?" David asked. "What do you do when you're not getting struck by lightning?" "I'm a lawyer. Corporate law, mostly mergers and acquisitions." The words felt strange in her mouth, as if she were describing someone else's life. "That sounds intense." Maya laughed, but there was no humor in it. "That's one word for it. I missed my grandmother's funeral today because of a contract dispute. She raised me, and I couldn't even take an afternoon off to say goodbye." The admission hung in the air between them, raw and unintended. Maya couldn't believe she just told a stranger something she hadn't even acknowledged to herself until this moment. David's expression softened. "I'm sorry for your loss. She used to tell me that work was important, but people were everything. I think I got that backwards somewhere along the way. It's not too late to get it right." Maya looked at him sharply. "You don't know me. You don't know my life." "No," David agreed. "But I know what it looks like when someone's running from something. And I know what it feels like to realize you've been moving in the wrong direction." Before Maya could ask what he meant, Dr. Patterson returned with discharge papers and a prescription for pain medication she probably wouldn't need. "You're free to go, but I want you to take it easy for the next few days," the doctor said. "No strenuous activity, and if you experience any chest pain, dizziness, or neurological symptoms, come back immediately." Maya nodded and signed the papers, but as they prepared to leave, she realized she had no idea what came next. Her car was still sitting in that muddy meadow, assuming it would even start after being soaked by the storm. Her apartment was 40 minutes away, and she didn't have anyone to call for a ride. David seemed to read her thoughts. "I can drive you home," he offered. "Or we can go get your car first, if you prefer." "You've done enough," Maya said, though the protest sounded weak even to her own ears. "Have I?" David asked. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you could use a friend right now." The word hit her harder than the lightning had. Friend. When was the last time she'd had one of those? Real friends, not networking contacts or colleagues who tolerated her presence at mandatory social events. People who cared about her well-being rather than her billable hours. "I don't want to impose," she said. "You're not imposing." Emma's. Spending the night at her aunt's place anyway, and I was just going home to an empty house and leftover pizza. At least this way I feel useful. Maya studied his face, looking for signs of obligation or pity, but found only genuine kindness. The kind of open, uncomplicated generosity she'd forgotten existed in the world. "Okay," she said finally. "Thank you." They drove back to the meadow in David's truck, the storm finally beginning to clear as evening approached. Maya's Honda sat exactly where she'd left it, looking forlorn and abandoned in the fading light. David pulled up beside it and got out to inspect the damage. "Doesn't look too bad," he called over. "A little mud, but nothing serious. Try starting it." Maya slid behind the wheel of her own car, turning the key with more hope than expectation. The engine turned over on the second try, purring to life as if nothing unusual had happened. "Looks like you're all set," David said, appearing at her driver's side window. "You sure you're okay to drive?" Maya nodded, though she wasn't entirely sure of anything anymore. The lightning strike had left her feeling untethered, as if the electrical charge had burned away more than just a few minutes of consciousness. "Where do you live?" David asked. "Portland, downtown." The address felt foreign now, like a place she'd visited once rather than the apartment she'd been paying rent on for 3 years. "That's a long drive for someone who just got struck by lightning. There's a decent motel about 10 minutes from here if you want to wait until morning." The suggestion was practical and sensible, but Maya found herself hesitating. Going to a motel meant being alone with her thoughts, alone with the weight of the day's revelations. It meant facing the reality of what she'd chosen when she drove away from her grandmother's funeral. "Actually," she said slowly, "would it be completely inappropriate if I asked to buy you dinner, as a thank you for saving my life?" David smiled, and Maya realized it was the first genuinely warm expression she'd seen directed at her in months. "It would be completely appropriate," he said. "I know a place." The restaurant David chose was nothing like the upscale establishments Maya frequented for business dinners. Rusty's Diner sat on the edge of a small town called Cedar Falls, its neon sign flickering intermittently and its parking lot filled with pickup trucks and older sedans. The interior was all red vinyl booths and checkered linoleum with a counter, where locals nursed coffee and discussed the weather. Maya felt overdressed in her business attire, but David seemed completely at ease as he guided her to a booth near the window. The waitress, a woman in her 50s with knowing eyes and a warm smile, greeted David by name. "Evening, David. Emma's not with you tonight? She's at Sarah's." "This is Maya," he said simply. The waitress, whose name tag read Dolores, sized Maya up with the kind of frank assessment that only small-town servers could manage without causing offense. "Pleased to meet you, honey. You look like you've had a long day." Maya almost laughed at the understatement. "You could say that." They ordered, David getting the meatloaf special, Maya choosing soup and a grilled cheese sandwich, and settled into the comfortable rhythm of conversation that had somehow developed between them. Maya found herself talking more freely than she had in years, telling David about her grandmother, about the pressure of her job, about the growing sense that she'd been living someone else's life. David listened without judgment, asking thoughtful questions and sharing pieces of his own story in return. He'd grown up in Cedar Falls, left for college and a brief stint in Seattle, then returned when his ex-wife decided she preferred city life to small-town monotony. "Emma was 3 when Jennifer left," he said, stirring sugar into his coffee. "Said she felt trapped, like she was suffocating in a place where everyone knew everyone else's business. That must have been hard." "It was, but Emma and I figured it out. We make a good team." Maya heard the love in his voice when he talked about his daughter, the quiet pride of a man who'd chosen to stay and do the hard work of single parenthood, rather than pursue easier options. "Do you miss it?" she asked. "The city?" David considered the question. "Sometimes. But I like the pace here." I like that Emma can ride her bike to school and I don't have to worry about her. I like that my neighbors know my name, even if it means they also know my business. And the loneliness doesn't bother you?" The question was more personal than Maya had intended, but David didn't seem offended. "Everyone's lonely sometimes," he said. "The trick is not to let it make you desperate." Maya thought about her own loneliness, the way it had driven her to work longer hours, to say yes to every assignment, to mistake professional achievement for personal fulfillment. How many nights had she fallen asleep at her desk, surrounded by briefs and contracts, telling herself she was building something meaningful? "I think I've been desperate for a long time without realizing it," she admitted. David reached across the table and squeezed her hand briefly, a gesture so natural and unforced that Maya felt something inside her chest loosen for the first time in months. "Maybe getting struck by lightning was just the universe's way of telling you to slow down," he said. They talked until the diner began to empty, until Dolores started giving them pointed looks and wiping down nearby tables with obvious intent. Finally, reluctantly, they paid the check and walked out into the clear night air. "Thank you," Maya said as they stood beside their cars. "For everything. For saving my life, for dinner, for listening. I don't remember the last time I had a conversation like that." "Me neither," David replied. "And you're welcome." Maya hesitated, key in hand. She didn't want the evening to end, didn't want her return to her empty apartment and the inevitable reckoning with her voicemail and email inbox. But she also couldn't think of a reason to prolong what had been, essentially, a chance encounter with a kind stranger. "Drive safe," David said. "And Maya, take care of yourself. You deserve better than what you've been settling for." Maya nodded, throat suddenly tight with emotion she couldn't name. As she drove away, David's taillights disappearing in her rearview mirror, she realized that something fundamental had shifted inside her. The lightning hadn't just knocked her unconscious, it had jolted her awake. For the first time in years, Maya drove the speed limit all the way home. Maya's apartment felt like a mausoleum when she finally unlocked the door at nearly midnight. The silence pressed against her eardrums as she stepped into the sterile space that had cost her $3,000 a month and somehow managed to feel less welcoming than the hospital waiting room. Sleek furniture arranged with magazine precision, not a single item out of place, because she was never there long enough to disturb anything. Even her coffee maker looked accusatory, as if it knew she'd been drinking better coffee from a diner she'd never heard of 6 hours ago. Her phone had been buzzing incessantly during the drive home, a symphony of professional anxiety that she'd ignored with the kind of reckless abandon that would have terrified her yesterday. Now she stared at the device lying on her granite kitchen counter, its screen lighting up every few seconds with another urgent message. 47 missed calls, 83 unread emails, 3 voicemails from her assistant, each one more frantic than the last. Maya picked up the phone, thumb hovering over the power button. For 34 years, she'd been available every hour of every day, tethered to her career by an invisible leash that she'd mistaken for ambition. But tonight, as rain began pattering against her floor-to-ceiling windows, she held down the power button until the screen went dark. The silence that followed was both terrifying and liberating. She moved through her evening routine like a sleepwalker, brushing her teeth in a bathroom mirror that reflected a stranger's face. Her hair was still damp from the storm, her clothes wrinkled from the hospital visit, and there was something different in her eyes. Something that hadn't been there this morning when she'd rushed out the door with a travel mug of coffee and a briefcase full of other people's problems. Maya lay in her king-sized bed, staring at the ceiling and listening to the city breathe outside her windows. But instead of the familiar insomnia that usually accompanied her high-stress days, she found her mind drifting to the warmth of David's truck, the easy conversation at Rusty's diner, the way he'd looked at her when she'd admitted to missing her grandmother's funeral. Not with judgment or pity, but with understanding. as if he recognized something in her story that resonated with his own. She fell asleep thinking about his hands, steady and sure as they'd checked her pulse, and woke 8 hours later, feeling more rested than she had in months. The morning sun streamed through her windows with an intensity that seemed almost aggressive after the storm. Maya made coffee in her pristine kitchen and stood at the window, watching the city wake up 30 floors below. Commuters hurried along. Sidewalks, briefcases in hand, already checking their phones for the day's first crisis. She recognized the urgency in their movements because it had been her own for so many years. Her phone lay where she'd left it, dark and silent. Maya stared at it for a long moment before deciding it could stay that way a little longer. Instead, she found herself pulling up the internet on her laptop, searching for information about Cedar Falls, Oregon. The town's website was charmingly outdated, full of photos of the annual Harvest Festival and announcements about the library's summer reading program. Population 3,847. Median income $32,000. Average home price $160,000. Maya had spent more than that on her car. She clicked through local business listings, finding David's name under Morrison Custom Woodworking. His website was simple but professional, showcasing furniture that managed to be both rustic and elegant. Dining tables that looked like they belonged in family homes, bookshelves that promised to hold generations of stories, rocking chairs that spoke of quiet evenings and peaceful conversation. There were testimonials from satisfied customers, people who praised not just David's craftsmanship, but his patience, his willingness to listen to their vision and translate it into something tangible. One review, from a woman named Patricia Henderson, particularly caught Maya's attention. David didn't just build us a kitchen table. He built us a place where our family could gather, where our children could do homework and our friends could share meals. He understood that furniture isn't just about function, it's about creating space for life to happen. Maya closed the laptop and sat back in her chair, coffee growing cold in her hands. When was the last time she'd created space for life to happen? Her apartment was beautiful but sterile, designed for impressing clients rather than living. She didn't cook, rarely entertained, and couldn't remember the last time she'd sat at her dining table for anything other than spreading out legal documents. The thought made her restless. Maya found herself pacing the apartment, seeing it with fresh eyes. The expensive art on the walls that she'd chosen from a catalog. The furniture selected by an interior designer she'd hired to create a professional aesthetic. The refrigerator that contained nothing but leftover takeout and bottled water because she'd forgotten how to cook anything more complicated than microwave popcorn. By noon, she'd made a decision that would have seemed impossible 24 hours earlier. Maya pulled out her phone, powered it on, and scrolled through her contacts until she found her assistant's number. Maya! Stephanie's voice was breathless with relief. Thank God you're okay. I've been calling all night. Mr. Brennan wants to see you immediately. The Hartley merger is in crisis, and the client is threatening to walk if Stephanie, Maya interrupted gently. I need you to clear my calendar for the rest of the week. There was a pause so long that Maya wondered if the call had dropped. I'm sorry, what? Clear my calendar. Cancel the meetings, postpone the depositions, reschedule. The client calls. Everything. Maya, I don't understand. Are you sick? Did something happen? Maya looked out at the city, at the endless parade of ambition and urgency playing out on the streets below. Something did happen, and I need some time to figure out what it means. But the Hartley merger will survive without me for a few days, and if it doesn't, then maybe it wasn't meant to happen in the first place. Maya ended the call before Stephanie could protest further, then immediately dialed another number. Her cousin Sarah answered on the third ring, her voice cautious. Maya, I wasn't sure you'd call. The hurt in Sarah's voice was unmistakable, and Maya felt a fresh wave of shame wash over her. Sarah had been the one to organize their grandmother's funeral, had handled all the arrangements while Maya buried herself in contract negotiations. "I'm sorry," Maya said, the words feeling inadequate but necessary. "I'm so sorry I wasn't there yesterday." "Grandma Lily would have understood," Sarah replied, though her tone suggested she wasn't quite as forgiving. "She always said you had important work to do. It's not more important than family. I lost sight of that, but I want to do better." Sarah's voice softened slightly. "What's brought this on? You sound different." Maya almost laughed at the understatement. "I got struck by lightning yesterday." "What? Literally?" "I was standing in a field during a thunderstorm, and lightning struck near me. I was unconscious for 10 minutes. Oh my God, Maya, are you okay? Are you in the hospital?" "I'm fine. But it made me realize some things. About how I've been living, about what I've been prioritizing." Maya took a deep breath. "I want to come to the house, to go through Grandma's things, to help with whatever needs to be done, if that's okay." There was another pause, shorter this time. "Of course it's okay. We're meeting there this afternoon, actually. Mom and Aunt Janet and I were going to start sorting through the attic. I'll be there," Maya promised. "And Sarah? Thank you for taking care of everything. For being there when I couldn't. We're family," Sarah said simply. "That's what we do." Maya packed a bag with shaking hands, throwing clothes into a suitcase without her usual careful planning. She'd told Stephanie she needed a few days, but as she looked around her apartment one more time, she wondered if she'd ever feel comfortable in this pristine cage again. The drive to her grandmother's house took her through familiar neighborhoods that seemed smaller than she remembered. She'd grown up in these streets, had learned to ride a bike on these sidewalks, but somewhere in the pursuit of professional success, she'd stopped seeing them as home and started seeing them as a place she'd outgrown. Her grandmother's house sat on a quiet street lined with mature oak trees, a modest craftsman bungalow with a front porch that had always been cluttered with plants and wind chimes. Maya pulled into the driveway behind Sarah's minivan and sat. For a moment, gathering courage. The front door opened before she could knock, and Sarah appeared with flour in her hair and red-rimmed eyes. She was 3 years younger than Maya, but had always seemed more mature, more grounded in the things that mattered. "You look terrible," Sarah said, then immediately pulled Maya into a fierce hug. "I'm so glad you're here." The house smelled like cinnamon and old books, exactly as Maya remembered. Her grandmother had been a baker, a reader, a woman who believed that any problem could be solved with fresh cookies and a good story. Living room was exactly as she'd left it, doilies on the side tables and framed photos covering every available surface. Maya's Aunt Janet looked up from a box of photo albums, her expression wary. Janet had never quite forgiven Maya for missing family gatherings, for choosing work over holidays, for becoming what she called too busy for her own good. "Maya," Janet said with careful politeness, "we weren't sure you'd make it." "I'm here," Maya replied, settling on the familiar couch where she'd spent countless afternoons listening to her grandmother's stories. "What can I do to help?" They worked in companionable silence, sorting through decades of accumulated memories. Maya's grandmother had been a saver, keeping every birthday card, every school photo, every piece of art Maya had created as a child. There were boxes of recipes written in careful cursive, collections of books with pages soft from repeated reading, and drawers full of yarn that would never become the sweaters her grandmother had planned to knit. It was in the bedroom closet that Maya found the letters. A shoebox tied with ribbon, tucked behind winter coats that still smelled faintly of her grandmother's perfume. The letters were addressed to her, written in her grandmother's distinctive handwriting, but they'd never been sent. "Dearest Maya," the first one began, dated 6 months ago. "I know you're busy with your important work, but I wanted you to know that I'm proud of you. Not because of your job or your success, but because of the kind person you've always been. I worry sometimes that you've forgotten that about yourself." Maya's hands trembled as she read letter after letter, each one a small meditation on love, family, and the importance of finding balance. Her grandmother had written about her garden, about the neighbors who checked on her, about the books she was reading, and the meals she was cooking. Simple, everyday things that somehow felt more meaningful than any contract Maya had ever negotiated. The last letter was dated just 2 weeks ago. "I've been thinking about your mother lately, about how proud she would be of the woman you've become. But I hope you remember that success isn't just about achieving your goals. It's about knowing when those goals need to change. Life is short, my dear girl. Don't spend it all working." Maya pressed the letter to her chest and wept for the first time since childhood, great heaving sobs that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside her soul. Sarah found her there an hour later, surrounded by scattered letters and the detritus of a life well lived. "She loved you so much," Sarah said quietly, settling beside Maya on the hardwood floor. "She used to say you were just like mom-driven. Ambitious, but with a heart bigger than you knew what to do with." "I failed her," Maya whispered. "I was so busy proving I could succeed that I forgot to actually live." "It's not too late," Sarah replied. "Grandma always said it's never too late to change direction if you realize you're on the wrong path." That evening, after her aunt and cousin had gone home, Maya sat alone in her grandmother's kitchen, drinking tea from the same cup she'd used as a child. The house was quiet, except for the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway, the same clock that had marked time through decades of family dinners and holiday celebrations. Maya pulled out her phone and scrolled through her contacts until she found David's number. She stared at it for several minutes, thumb hovering over the call button. What would she say? How could she explain that a stranger's kindness had somehow catalyzed a complete reevaluation of her life? Instead of calling, she opened a text message. "Thank you again for yesterday. I wanted you to know that your kindness meant more than you probably realize. I hope you and Emma are well." She hit send before she could second-guess herself then. Immediately regretted it. David had been a good Samaritan, nothing more. He'd done what any decent person would do in the same situation. The fact that their conversation had lingered in her mind didn't mean she'd had the same impact on his evening. Her phone buzzed with a response faster than she'd expected. "Glad you're feeling better. Emma wants to know if you're the lady who got hit by lightning. She's very impressed." Maya found herself smiling for the first time in days. "Tell her yes, and that it's not nearly as exciting as it sounds. She says you're officially the coolest person she's never met." High praise from a 7-year-old. Maya stared at the phone, fingers hovering over the keyboard. She could end the conversation there, thank him again, and return to her solitary contemplation of her grandmother's life. Or she could take a chance on the connection that had felt so natural the night before. "Would it be weird if I said I'd like to meet her sometime?" She typed, then deleted it. Too forward. "I hope she knows how lucky she is to have you as a dad," she tried instead, then deleted that too. Finally, she settled on something simple. "She sounds wonderful." She is. Takes after her grandmother on that front. Maya sensed an opening. A glimpse into the loss that David carried as quietly as she'd been carrying her own. "You were close to your mother?" "She raised Emma and me after Jennifer left. Passed away 2 years ago. Cancer." The simple words carried a weight of grief that Maya recognized intimately. Loss was loss, whether it came suddenly or slowly, whether it was expected or a complete surprise. The hole it left behind was the same shape regardless. "I'm sorry," she texted back. "I lost my grandmother this week. The funeral was yesterday." "I'm sorry too. Were you close?" Maya looked around the kitchen, at the recipe card still clipped to the refrigerator, at the reading glasses folded neatly on the counter, at the crossword puzzle half finished on the table. "She raised me. And I wasn't there when she died because I was too busy with work." "Grief makes us hard on ourselves," David replied. But I bet she understood. How do you know? Because grandmothers always understand. It's part of their job description. Maya laughed despite herself, a sound that felt foreign in the quiet house. Emma's lucky to have had that wisdom in her life. She was. Mom used to tell her that love isn't just about being there for the big moments. It's about showing up for all the little ones in between. I try to remember that when I'm tempted to work late or skip bedtime stories. The message hit Maya like a physical blow. How many little moments had she missed in pursuit of the big ones? How many bedtime stories had her grandmother wanted to share that Maya had been too busy to hear? "That's beautiful advice," she texted back. She was a beautiful person. Kind of like someone else I met recently. Maya stared at the message, heat rising in her cheeks. Was David flirting with her? Or was she reading too much into a simple compliment? It had been so long since she'd engaged in anything resembling romance that she'd lost the ability to interpret social cues. "I should let you get some rest," she typed, taking the safe route. "Thank you for listening. Again. Anytime. And Maya, give yourself some grace. Life has a way of putting us exactly where we need to be, even when we can't see it at the time." Maya powered off her phone and sat in the gathering darkness, thinking about fate and lightning strikes and the strange way life could pivot on a single moment of connection. Outside, the first stars were beginning to appear in the clear sky, and for the first time in years, Maya found herself paying attention to their quiet beauty. She spent the night in her childhood bedroom, surrounded by faded wallpaper and memories that felt both distant and immediate. The bed was the same twin mattress she'd slept on through high school, and the dresser still held a few abandoned treasures from her teenage years. A jewelry box that played furry lease when opened. A collection of novels she'd loved and forgotten. A photo of her and her grandmother at Maya's law school graduation, both of them beaming with pride and possibility. Maya picked up the photo, studying her younger self. She'd been so certain then, so confident that success was simply a matter of working harder than everyone else. When had that certainty curdled into desperation? When had ambition become a prison instead of a pathway? Her phone buzzed with a text message from Stephanie. "Mr. Brennan wants to see you first thing Monday morning. The Hartley situation is getting worse." Maya stared at the message for a long moment, then deleted it without responding. Monday felt like a lifetime away, and for the first time in her career, someone else's crisis wasn't automatically her emergency. Instead, she found herself thinking about David's furniture website, about the testimonials from customers who praised his ability to create not just beautiful objects, but spaces where life could unfold naturally. She thought about the warmth in his voice when he talked about Emma, about the easy way he'd made conversation with strangers at the diner, about the quiet confidence of a man who'd found his place in the world and wasn't apologizing for it. Maya fell asleep wondering what it would feel like to have that kind of certainty, that sense of purpose that came from creating something meaningful rather than simply accumulating professional victories. She woke to the sound of rain pattering against her bedroom window, a gentle morning shower that felt like a benediction after the previous day's storm. Maya lay in bed for several minutes, listening to the rhythm and remembering what it felt like to wake up slowly, without the immediate anxiety of checking her phone for overnight emergencies. Downstairs, she made coffee in her grandmother's ancient percolator and sat at the kitchen table with the morning paper. She couldn't remember the last time she'd read actual newsprint, had consumed information at a pace that allowed for reflection rather than reaction. The headlines seemed less urgent when filtered through paper and ink rather than the relentless scroll of digital news. There was an article buried on page 3 about the lightning strike the night before, a brief mention of unusual electrical activity in the Cascade foothills. Maya read it twice, marveling at how a life-changing event could be reduced to 3 paragraphs of meteorological data. Her phone remained silent, powered off and tucked away in her purse. Maya had never gone more than a few hours without checking email, But now she found herself cherishing the disconnection. The world would continue spinning without her constant input, a realization that was both humbling and liberating. She spent the morning going through more of her grandmother's belongings, finding treasures in unexpected places. A recipe for chocolate chip cookies written on the back of an envelope, a pressed flower from a garden that no longer existed, a photograph of Maya's mother as a young woman, laughing at something outside the camera's frame. It was in a desk drawer that she found her grandmother's journal, a leather-bound book filled with observations about daily life, family concerns, and quiet wisdom. The entries were sporadic, written whenever her grandmother had something worth preserving in words. Maya called today, read one entry from 6 months ago. She sounded tired, more tired than someone her age should be. I worry that she's forgotten how to rest, how to simply be present in a moment without thinking about the next task on her list. I wish I could remind her that success without joy is just expensive unhappiness. Maya closed the journal and pressed it against her chest, overwhelmed by the accuracy of her grandmother's observation. Expensive unhappiness. The phrase captured something essential about the life she'd been living, the way professional achievement had become a substitute for genuine fulfillment. Around noon, Sarah arrived with groceries and her 2 children in tow. 8-year-old Marcus immediately claimed the living room floor for his collection of toy cars, while 5-year-old Sophie attached herself to Maya's leg with the fearless affection that only small children could manage. "Aunt Maya, why are you so sad?" Sophie asked with the brutal honesty of youth. Maya knelt to Sophie's level, looking into eyes that reminded her of her grandmother's. "I'm sad because Great-Grandma Lily went to heaven, and I'm going to miss her. But she's still here," Sophie said matter-of-factly, pointing to the photographs on the mantel. "She's in all the pictures, and in the cookies you made yesterday, and in the way you smell like her house." The simple wisdom of a 5-year-old cut through Maya's complicated grief more effectively than any therapy session she'd ever attended. Her grandmother was still present, woven into the fabric of memory and tradition, and the 1,000 small ways love persisted beyond physical presence. "You're right," Maya said, pulling Sophie into a hug. "She is still here." Sarah watched the exchange with knowing eyes. "Kids see things differently," she said. "They don't complicate love the way adults do." They spent the afternoon cooking together, following their grandmother's recipes and filling the house with familiar aromas. Maya realized she'd forgotten how satisfying it could be to create something with her hands, to measure and mix and wait, for the alchemy of heat to transform simple ingredients into comfort. As evening approached and Sarah prepared to leave with her children, she turned to Maya with a serious expression. "What are you going to do?" she asked. "About work, about your life in Portland?" Maya looked around the kitchen at the evidence of a day spent in simple pleasures and meaningful work. "I don't know yet," she admitted. "But I know I can't go back to the way things were. Grandma always said that sometimes you have to lose your way to find your path." After Sarah left, Maya found herself restless again. The house felt too quiet, too full of memories and might-have-beens. She grabbed her keys and drove aimlessly through her old neighborhood, past the elementary school where she'd learned to read, past the park where she'd played soccer, past the library where her grandmother had taken her every Saturday for story time. Without consciously deciding on a destination, Maya found herself on the highway heading east toward the mountains. The rain had stopped and the sky was beginning to clear as she drove through increasingly rural landscapes. She recognized the route from the night before, though it looked completely different in daylight. She turned off the main highway onto the smaller road that led to Cedar Falls, telling herself she was just curious about the town, that she wanted to see it without the drama of emergency vehicles and hospital visits. But as she drove past Morrison Custom Woodworking, she found herself slowing down, craning her neck to catch a glimpse of the workshop where David created his beautiful furniture. The building was larger than she'd expected, a converted barn, with wide doors that stood open to the afternoon air. Maya could see the warm glow of work lights inside, could hear the distant sound of machinery. Before she could talk herself out of it, she pulled into the gravel parking area and got out of her car. The workshop smelled like sawdust and varnish, scents that spoke of honest work and tangible creation. David stood at a workbench with his back to her, running a piece of sandpaper along the edge of what looked like a coffee table. He was wearing safety glasses and had sawdust in his hair, completely absorbed in his task. Maya cleared her throat softly, not wanting to startle him. David looked up, and his face broke into a smile that made something flutter in her chest. "Maya," he said, setting down his sandpaper and pulling off his safety glasses. "This is a nice surprise. What brings you to Cedar Falls?" "I was visiting my grandmother's house," she said, suddenly self-conscious about her impulse to seek him out. "It's about an hour from here. I was just driving and ended up here somehow." David nodded as if spontaneous drives that led to unexpected destinations made perfect sense. "How are you feeling? Any lingering effects from yesterday?" "Physically, I'm fine," Maya said. "Emotionally, I feel like I've been turned inside out." "That seems like a reasonable response to getting struck by lightning," Maya laughed. "I think the lightning was just the catalyst. I've been avoiding some hard truths about my life, and suddenly I can't ignore them anymore." David gestured to a pair of chairs in a corner of the workshop, clearly pieces he'd made himself. Maya settled into one and was surprised by how perfectly it supported her body, as if it had been designed specifically for her proportions. "Want to talk about it?" David asked, settling into the other chair. Maya found herself telling him everything. About her grandmother's funeral, about the choice she'd made to prioritize work over family, about the letter she'd found and the journal entries that had forced her to confront the emptiness of her professional success. David listened with the same focused attention he'd given to his woodworking, asking thoughtful questions and offering observations that helped Maya untangle her complicated feelings. "It sounds like you're grieving more than just your grandmother," he said when she finished. "You're grieving the life you thought you wanted. How do you start over at 34? Maya asked. "How do you throw away everything you've worked for and begin again? Who says you have to throw anything away?" David replied, "Maybe it's not about starting over. Maybe it's about building on what you already have, adding new elements that make the whole structure stronger." He gestured to the coffee table he'd been working on when she arrived. This piece started as a dining room table. The client decided she wanted something different, so instead of scrapping it, I modified the design. Cut it down, changed the proportions, added some decorative elements. Now it's something completely different, but still fundamentally sound. Maya studied the table, seeing the wisdom in his metaphor. "So I don't have to quit my job and become a completely different person?" "Not unless that's what you want. But maybe there's a way to practice law that aligns with your values. Maybe there are clients whose causes you believe in, cases that feel meaningful rather than just profitable." The conversation was interrupted by the sound of a school bus rumbling past the workshop. David glanced at his watch and smiled. "Emma's home," he said. "Would you like to meet her?" Maya's heart jumped with unexpected nervousness. Meeting someone's child felt significant, like crossing a threshold she wasn't sure she was ready for. But before she could second-guess herself, David was leading her out of the workshop toward a modest house that sat adjacent to the barn. Emma Morrison turned out to be a whirlwind of energy and curiosity, all long limbs and wild curly hair that had clearly inherited David's tendency to collect sawdust. She burst through the front door with a backpack twice her size, chattering about her day before she noticed Maya standing beside her father. "Are you the lightning lady?" Emma asked without preamble, her eyes wide with excitement. "I am," Maya confirmed, charmed by the child's directness. "That is so cool. Did it hurt?" Did you see your whole life flash before your eyes? Did you get superpowers? Emma, David said gently, give Maya a chance to breathe. It's okay, Maya laughed. No superpowers, unfortunately. And it happened so fast I don't really remember the actual strike. But yes, it hurt afterward. Emma nodded solemnly, as if filing away important information for future reference. Daddy says you're a lawyer. Do you put bad guys in jail? Not exactly. I help companies make agreements with each other. Emma looked puzzled. That sounds boring. Emma, David warned, but Maya held up a hand. You know what? It is kind of boring. I think I'd like to find a way to make it more interesting. Emma brightened. You could be like the lawyers on TV who help people who can't help themselves. That's a very good idea, Maya said seriously. I'll have to think about that. As the afternoon wore on, Maya found herself completely charmed by Emma's boundless enthusiasm and unself-conscious curiosity. The little girl showed her around the house, pointing out her favorite books and the fort she'd built in the backyard and the goldfish she'd named after characters from Harry Potter. David made dinner with the easy competence of a man who'd mastered the art of single parenthood, involving Emma in age-appropriate tasks while maintaining a running commentary that kept everyone laughing. Maya watched their interactions with something approaching envy, recognizing the easy intimacy of a family that had learned to function as a team. Maya, do you have kids? Emma asked over plates of spaghetti and homemade garlic bread. No, Maya replied, the familiar pang of loss hitting her unexpectedly. I always thought I would someday, but I got so busy with work that someday never came. It's not too late, Emma said with the casual certainty of childhood. My friend Jessica's mom had a baby when she was really old, like 40 or something. David nearly choked on his water. Emma, 40 isn't that old. It's older than you, Emma pointed out logically. By 2 years, David protested, then looked at Maya with amused resignation. I'm 38, in case you were wondering. Maya found herself studying David with new eyes, noticing the laugh lines around his eyes, the competent way he moved around his kitchen, the patient manner in which he navigated his daughter's endless questions. He was attractive in a completely different way than the men she usually dated, solid and dependable rather than flashy and ambitious. After dinner, Emma insisted on showing Maya her room, which was an explosion of creativity and imagination. The walls were covered with her artwork, and every surface held collections of rocks, leaves, books, and mysterious treasures that only made sense to his 7-year-old mind. This is my memory box, Emma said, pulling a shoebox from under her bed. I keep important stuff in here. She opened the box to reveal a collection of ticket stubs, photographs, a pressed flower, and various small objects that clearly held significance beyond their apparent value. My mom gave me this before she left, Emma said, pulling out a small silver locket. She said it would help me remember that she loved me even when she couldn't be here. Maya felt her throat tighten at the matter-of-fact way Emma discussed her mother's absence. That's very special. Do you have a memory box? Emma asked. Maya thought about her sterile apartment, about the lack of sentimental objects in her carefully curated life. No, but I think I'd like to make one. I could help you, Emma offered. I'm really good at knowing what's important to keep. As the evening wound down and Maya prepared to leave, Emma hugged her with the fierce affection of a child who decided someone was worthy of her attention. Will you come back? Emma asked. Maya looked at David, seeing something hopeful in his expression that made her pulse quicken. If your dad doesn't mind, I'd like that very much. I don't mind, David said quietly. I'd like that too. Maya drove home through the darkening evening with Emma's laughter echoing in her ears, and the memory of David's smile warming her chest. For the first time in years, she felt like she was moving towards something instead of running away from it. Her phone had 17 missed calls and 43 new emails, but Maya left it powered off as she prepared for bed in her grandmother's house. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, its own decisions about the direction her life would take. But tonight, she wanted to hold on to the feeling of belonging somewhere, of being welcomed into a family's evening routine, not because of what she could offer professionally, but simply because they enjoyed her company. Maya fell asleep thinking about memory boxes and garlic bread and the way David's eyes had crinkled when he laughed at his daughter's precocious observations. Outside her window, the stars shone with the same quiet promise they'd offered the night before, and for the first time in months, Maya felt like she was exactly where she needed to be. The voicemail from Richard Brennan arrived at 6:47 on Monday morning, delivered in the clipped, authoritative tone that had intimidated junior associates for 3 decades. Maya stared at her phone screen as his voice filled her grandmother's quiet kitchen, each word landing like a small explosion in the peaceful morning air. "Maya, I don't know what kind of game you think you're playing, but your absence has put the entire Hartley acquisition in jeopardy. The client is furious, the opposing counsel is threatening to withdraw their offer, and I've had to personally intervene to prevent a complete collapse of negotiations. You will be in my office by 9 a.m., or you can clean out your desk. This is not a request." Maya set the phone down with trembling fingers and stared out the window at her grandmother's garden, where morning glory vines climbed the fence posts in defiant spirals of purple and blue. 3 days ago, that voicemail would have sent her into a panic, would have had her dressed and on the highway within minutes, apologizing profusely for putting her career at risk. Now sitting in the kitchen where she'd learned to make pancakes and solve arithmetic problems, the message felt like an echo from another life. She poured herself coffee from the percolator and considered her options. The safe choice was obvious: drive to Portland, grovel appropriately, and slip back into the familiar routine of 18-hour days and weekend emergencies. The partnership track would resume, the billable hours would accumulate, and in 5 years she'd be exactly where she'd planned to be when she graduated law school. The other choice was harder to define but impossible to ignore. It involved admitting that the life she'd built was beautiful on paper, but hollow in practice. That success without meaning was just expensive misery in designer clothing. It meant disappointing people who'd invested in her potential, walking away from a salary that had taken years to achieve, and facing the terrifying prospect of reinventing herself at 34. Maya's phone buzzed with a text from David. "How are you feeling this morning? Emma keeps asking when the lightning lady is coming back." The message made her smile despite the weight of decision pressing against her chest. She typed back, "Better than expected. Tell Emma I'm thinking about her too. She'd be thrilled. Any chance you're free for lunch today? There's something I'd like to show you." Maya looked at her phone, then at the clock on her grandmother's wall, then at the business suit hanging in the closet upstairs. 9 a.m. was 40 minutes away. She could still make it to Brennan's office in time to salvage her career, could walk back into her old life and pretend the last 3 days had been an aberration, a brief detour caused by trauma and grief. Instead, she texted back, "I'd love to. What time works for you? Noon? I'll pick you up." Maya spent the rest of the morning composing an email she'd never imagined writing. She drafted it 3 times, each version more direct than the last, until she arrived at something that felt both professional and honest. "Mr. Brennan," the final version began, "I apologize for my sudden absence and any inconvenience it has caused the firm and our clients. Recent events have led me to reevaluate my priorities and career goals. I will be taking an extended leave of absence to address personal matters and determine the best path forward. I understand this may affect my standing at the firm, and I accept full responsibility for that consequence. I will be available by email for urgent matters related to my existing cases, but I will not be returning to the office for the foreseeable future. Thank you for the opportunities you have provided me over the past 6 years. Sincerely, Maya Chen." She read it 4 times before hitting send, then immediately closed her laptop and walked outside to her grandmother's garden. The morning air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of roses and the distant promise of autumn. Maya knelt beside a patch of herbs that her grandmother had tended for decades, running her fingers through the soil that had nurtured generations of basil and thyme. Her phone began ringing almost immediately, but Maya left it inside and focused on the simple pleasure of weeding. There was something meditative about the work, about distinguishing between what belonged and what needed to be removed, about creating space for growth by eliminating competition. By the time David's truck pulled into the driveway at noon, Maya had cleared 3 flower beds and felt more accomplished than she had after closing any multi-million-dollar deal. She emerged from the garden with dirt under her fingernails and a sense of satisfaction that went deeper than professional achievement. "You look happy," David observed as she climbed into the passenger seat. "I think I am," Maya replied, surprised by the truth of it. "I just quit my job." David's eyebrows rose. "That's either the best news or the worst news I've heard today. I'm not sure yet. Ask me again in 6 months when I'm either fulfilled or homeless." "I have a feeling you're going to be just fine," David said, putting the truck in gear. "Where we're going might help you see some possibilities you haven't considered." They drove through the countryside toward the mountains, past farms and forests and the occasional roadside stand selling fresh corn and late summer tomatoes. Maya found herself relaxing into the passenger seat, watching the landscape roll. Without feeling the need to check her phone or plan her next move, "Can I ask you something?" she said as they turned onto a narrow road that climbed through stands of evergreen trees. "Shoot, do you ever regret staying here? Choosing the small-town life over whatever possibilities might have been waiting in Seattle or Portland?" David was quiet for a moment, navigating a series of switchbacks that offered glimpses of the Coast Valley below. "I used to," he said finally. "Right after Jennifer left, I felt like I was trapped. Like I'd chosen the wrong life and was stuck with the consequences." "What changed?" "Emma, mostly. Watching her grow up here, seeing how she knew every neighbor's name and felt safe walking to school alone. And my mom, before she died. She helped me understand that there's dignity in choosing depth over breadth, in becoming part of something larger than yourself instead of always chasing the next opportunity." Maya nodded, thinking about her own pursuit of the next promotion, the next client, the next milestone that would finally prove her worth. "I don't think I've ever been part of anything larger than myself." "That's not true," David said. "You've been part of your family, part of your grandmother's story. You've helped clients achieve their goals, even if those goals weren't always meaningful to you personally. The question is whether you want to find a way to align your skills with something that matters to you." They crested a hill and David pulled into a gravel parking area beside a weathered sign that read, "Clearwater Community Center, serving our neighbors since 1952. The building was modest but well-maintained, a converted schoolhouse surrounded by gardens and play equipment that showed signs of recent repair. "What is this place?" Maya asked as they got out of the truck. "A project I've been working on for the past year," David replied. "Come on, I'll show you around." The community center bustled with quiet activity. In one room, a group of elderly residents played cards while volunteers served coffee and homemade cookies. Down the hall, a young mother worked at a computer while her toddler played with blocks nearby. The kitchen hummed with the sounds of meal preparation, and Maya could see people of all ages working together to package food for what looked like a delivery program. "We serve about 200 families in the county," explained Margaret Santos, the center's director, as she gave Maya a tour. "Food assistance, job training, childcare, legal aid, basic medical services. Whatever people need to get back on their feet." Maya paused at the mention of legal aid. "What kind of legal services do you provide?" "Very basic stuff," Margaret replied. "Help with landlord disputes, disability applications, immigration paperwork. We have a volunteer attorney who comes in once a month, but the need is much greater than what we can currently handle. They moved through the building, and Maya found herself increasingly impressed by the scope of services offered and the efficient way volunteers coordinated their efforts. This wasn't charity work done by people with too much time and money. This was community members taking care of each other, pooling resources and skills to address problems that affected them all. In the back room, David was overseeing the installation of new shelving units, working alongside two teenagers who were learning carpentry skills as part of a job training program. Maya watched him explain joinery techniques with the same patient attention she'd seen him give to Emma's endless questions, and she realized that this was where his furniture-making skills intersected with his commitment to community. David built most of the furniture here, Margaret said, noticing Maya's interest. Tables, chairs, storage units, even the playground equipment outside. He donates his time and materials whenever we need something. It's not charity, David said, overhearing. It's investment. When the community thrives, everyone benefits. After the tour, David and Maya sat on the front steps of the community center, watching volunteers load delivery trucks with meals for homebound seniors. The afternoon sun slanted through the trees, and Maya could hear the distant sounds of children playing in the nearby schoolyard. This is what you wanted to show me, Maya said. Not just the center, but the idea that there are other ways to use your skills. I thought you might find it interesting, David replied. You mentioned wanting to help people who can't help themselves. This is where those people are. Maya thought about the cases she'd worked on at Brennan Associates, the corporate mergers and acquisitions that generated enormous fees, but rarely improved anyone's life in meaningful ways. She thought about the 20-hour days spent crafting contracts that would make rich companies richer, while people in her own state struggled with basic legal problems that could be solved with a few hours of competent representation. How would it work? She asked. I mean, practically speaking. I can't survive on volunteer work, and I doubt the community center has the budget to hire a full-time attorney. There are grants, David said. Federal funding for rural legal aid programs. And some lawyers build practices that combine pro bono work with paying clients who can afford to support the mission. You've researched this. I might have done some reading after our conversation yesterday. There's a lawyer in Bend who runs a practice like that. Takes on corporate clients to fund legal aid work for farm workers and immigrants. She says it's the most satisfying work she's ever done. Maya stared across the parking lot at the mountains rising in the distance, their peaks touched with the first hint of autumn snow. The idea David was proposing felt both terrifying and exhilarating, like standing at the edge of a cliff with the choice to either step back to safety or leap into unknown territory. I'd have to start over, she said. Build a practice from scratch, learn areas of law I've never touched. Immigration, family law, housing disputes. I've spent 6 years specializing in corporate transactions. You'd also have to figure out how to live on a fraction of your current income, at least initially, David added. Small-town lawyers don't drive luxury cars or live in downtown penthouses. Maya thought about her apartment, about the monthly rent that exceeded many people's entire income, about the designer clothes hanging in her closet and the expensive cars sitting in her reserved parking space. She'd accumulated all the trappings of success, but couldn't remember the last time any of those possessions had brought her genuine pleasure. Would I have to move here? She asked. To Cedar Falls? Not necessarily. But it would be hard to serve rural communities while living in the city. People need to trust their lawyer, and trust comes from being part of the community, not just visiting it. Maya nodded slowly, recognizing the truth in his observation. Her current clients paid premium fees partly because she was available to them at all hours, because she understood their business environment and could anticipate their needs. Rural clients would need the same level of commitment, the same sense that their lawyer was invested in their success. "Can I ask you something personal?" Maya said. "Sure." "When Jennifer left, when you decided to stay here and raise Emma alone, were you scared?" David was quiet for a long moment, watching a red-tailed hawk circle overhead. "Terrified," he admitted. "I'd never been the primary parent. I didn't know how to braid hair or help with homework or explain why Mommy didn't love us enough to stay. I was convinced I was going to screw up Emma's entire life, but you didn't. I don't know about that. I made plenty of mistakes. Still do. But I learned that being scared doesn't disqualify you from making good choices. Sometimes it's the fear that tells you something is important enough to fight for." Maya felt something shift inside her chest, a loosening of the tight control she'd maintained over her life for so many years. Fear had been her constant companion since law school, driving her to work harder, bill more hours, chase higher positions. But she'd mistaken that fear for ambition, had never considered that it might be pointing her away from what mattered rather than toward it. "I need to think about this," she said. "Of course you do. It's a big decision." They drove back to her grandmother's house in comfortable silence, both lost in their own thoughts. As David pulled into the driveway, Maya noticed a black sedan parked across the street, its engine running and windows tinted too dark to see inside. "Are you expecting someone?" David asked, noticing her attention. "No," Maya replied, though something about the car made her uneasy. Probably just someone using the driveway to turn around. But as they sat talking in David's truck, the sedan remained motionless, its presence somehow ominous in the quiet residential neighborhood. Maya found herself wondering if someone from the firm had come looking for her, if Richard Brennan had decided that her email required a face-to-face response. "I should probably go inside," she said, gathering her purse and jacket. "Thank you for today. For showing me the community center, for helping me see possibilities I hadn't considered." "Thank you for being open to them," David replied. "Not everyone would be willing to consider such a dramatic change." Maya leaned across the center console and kissed his cheek, a gesture that felt both natural and charged with possibility. David's skin was warm and slightly rough with afternoon stubble, and she caught the scent of sawdust and something essentially masculine that made her pulse quicken. "I'll call you tonight," she said, then climbed out of the truck before she could second-guess the impulse that had led to the kiss. David drove away with a wave, and Maya walked toward her grandmother's front door, fishing in her purse for keys. The black sedan remained parked across the street, and as she reached the porch, its engine started and it pulled away slowly, as if its driver had been waiting for David to leave. Maya's unease deepened as she unlocked the door and stepped into the house. Something felt different, though she couldn't immediately identify what had changed. The rooms looked exactly as she'd left them, but there was a quality to the silence that seemed off, as if someone had recently disturbed the air. In the kitchen, her laptop sat exactly where she'd left it, but the angle was slightly wrong, as if someone had moved it and then tried to replace it precisely. Maya opened the computer and checked her email, finding 73 new messages, most of them marked urgent. Her heart sank as she scrolled through the subject lines, seeing the progression of alarm and anger from colleagues and clients who discovered her sudden absence. But it was the message from an address she didn't recognize that made her blood run cold. The subject line read simply, "We need to talk," and when she opened it, there was no greeting, no signature, just a single line of text. "Your recent behavior has attracted attention. 3 p.m. tomorrow. Riverside Park, North Entrance." Maya stared at the message, her mouth suddenly dry. Who was we? What attention had her behavior attracted? And why did the anonymous email feel like a threat rather than an invitation? She considered calling David, but what would she tell him? That she was receiving mysterious emails and paranoid. About black sedans? That quitting her job might have consequences she hadn't anticipated. She barely understood what was happening herself. Instead, Maya called Sarah, who answered on the second ring with the harried tone of a mother managing dinner preparation and homework supervision. "Maya, is everything okay? You sound strange. Has anyone been asking about me? Looking for me?" "What do you mean? Like who?" "I don't know. People from my firm, maybe. Private investigators. Anyone unusual." Sarah paused, and Maya could hear her moving to a quieter part of the house. "Actually, yes. A man came by this afternoon asking if I knew where you were staying. Said he was from your office and needed to deliver some important documents." "Did you tell him about Grandma's house?" "No, of course not. I told him I hadn't seen you since the funeral." "But Maya, he already knew about the house. He asked specifically if you were staying there." Maya's hands began to shake. "What? Did he look like?" "Tall, expensive suit, very polite, but something off about his eyes. Like he was sizing me up the whole time he was talking. I didn't like him. If he comes back, don't tell him anything. And Sarah, maybe don't bring the kids over here for a few days." "Maya, you're scaring me. What's going on?" "I don't know yet. But I'm going to find out." After hanging up, Maya double-checked all the locks on doors and windows, then closed the curtains in every room. The house felt different now, less like a sanctuary and more like a place where she was hiding. She'd thought quitting her job was the biggest risk she'd face, but apparently walking away from Brennan Associates had opened doors she hadn't known existed. Maya spent the evening researching everything she could find about the Hartley acquisition, the deal that had supposedly been jeopardized by her absence. What she discovered made her stomach clench with a familiar combination of anger and disgust. Hartley Industries was a defense contractor with a history of environmental violations and worker safety issues. The acquisition would allow them to expand operations into a new state while avoiding existing regulatory oversight. She'd been so focused on the legal complexities of the merger that she'd never really considered what the deal would accomplish in the real world. How many communities would be affected by Hartley's expansion? How many workers would be exposed to unsafe conditions? How many environmental regulations would be circumvented through careful restructuring? The anonymous email began to make more sense. If powerful interests were behind the Hartley deal, if there were people who stood to gain enormous profits from its completion, then Maya's sudden departure wasn't just an inconvenience. It was a threat to carefully laid plans that involved far more money than her annual salary. Maya closed her laptop and sat in her grandmother's living room, surrounded by photographs and mementos of a life lived with integrity and purpose. Her grandmother had never earned much money, had never held positions of power or influence, but she'd raised children and grandchildren who knew the difference between right and wrong. She'd been part of a community that looked out for its members, that valued character over achievement. The contrast with Maya's current situation couldn't have been sharper. She'd spent 6 years climbing a ladder that led to a corner office, overlooking a city she barely knew, working for clients whose goals she'd never questioned, accumulating professional victories that felt increasingly hollow. But walking away wasn't going to be as simple as sending an email and packing her apartment. There were people who'd invested in her career, who expected her to deliver on projects that served their interests rather than her conscience. And apparently, some of those people weren't content to let her leave quietly. Maya's phone buzzed with a text from David. "Emma wants to know if you'd like to come to her soccer game on Saturday. Fair warning, she's more enthusiastic than skilled." The message felt like a lifeline, a reminder that there were people who cared about her presence for reasons that had nothing to do with her professional utility. Maya typed back, "I'd love to. What time?" 10 a.m. at the elementary school. Emma says to bring a camera because she's going to score her first goal. Tell her I'll be there with bells on. She says bells would be distracting, but a foam finger would be acceptable. Maya laughed despite her anxiety, imagining Emma's earnest expression as she dispensed advice about appropriate sporting event accessories. The little girl's matter-of-fact acceptance of Maya's place in their lives felt like a gift, uncomplicated by the power dynamics and hidden agendas that had defined most of her adult relationships. As she prepared for bed, Maya found herself thinking about tomorrow's mysterious meeting. She could ignore the email, could pretend she'd never received it, and hope that whoever had sent it would simply move on to other concerns, but experience told her that powerful people didn't give up easily when their interests were threatened, and her sudden departure from a crucial deal had apparently crossed someone's line. Maya set her alarm for 7 a.m. and placed a baseball bat beside her bed, feeling foolish but unwilling to take chances. She'd spent her career believing that success in corporate law was simply a matter of working harder and smarter than the competition. But lying in her childhood bedroom, listening to unfamiliar cars pass on the street outside, she realized that some games had rules she'd never learned and stakes she'd never considered. The morning brought fresh concerns along with autumn's first frost. Maya woke to find her car windows covered with a thin layer of ice that would take several minutes to scrape clean, time during which she'd be exposed and vulnerable in her grandmother's driveway. More troubling was the discovery that someone had walked through the garden during the night, leaving footprints in the soft soil between the tomato plants. Maya examined the prints while her coffee brewed, noting their size and depth, the pattern of the sole that suggested expensive dress, shoes rather than work boots or athletic footwear. Whoever had been prowling around her grandmother's house wasn't a casual burglar or curious neighbor. She called the local police and spoke to Officer Martinez, a young woman who took the report seriously, but couldn't offer much hope for immediate resolution. No signs of forced entry or actual trespassing, Martinez explained. The footprints could belong to anyone, a lost delivery driver, someone walking their dog who cut through the yard. Unless they actually try to break in or make contact, there's not much we can do. What about the email? Maya asked. Meeting someone in a public park isn't illegal, even if the invitation was anonymous. But I'd recommend bringing a friend if you decide to go, and definitely meet in a well-populated area during daylight hours. Maya thanked the officer and hung up, feeling only marginally better about her situation. The official response was rational and measured, but it didn't address the growing certainty that her professional life had entangled her in something more complex than a simple employment dispute. At 2:30, Maya drove to Riverside Park and parked near the north entrance as instructed. The park was busy with afternoon joggers and families with young children, which provided some comfort, but also meant that any conversation would need to be carefully managed to avoid unwanted attention. She recognized the man waiting on a bench near the playground immediately, though she'd never met him in person. Marcus Webb was a senior partner at Harrison, Klein and Associates, the firm representing Hartley Industries in the acquisition. Maya had seen his photo in legal publications and knew his reputation as someone who made problems disappear through methods that weren't always discussed in polite company. Ms. Chen, Webb said, rising as she approached. Thank you for coming. I wasn't aware I had much choice, Maya replied, remaining standing rather than accepting his gesture toward the bench. Webb smiled, but the expression didn't reach his eyes. Of course you have choices. That's what we're here to discuss. We? My clients. People who've invested considerable time and resources in the Hartley acquisition. People who are understandably concerned about your sudden departure from such a critical negotiation. Maya felt her legal training kick in, the instinct to reveal nothing while gathering as much information as possible. I submitted my resignation properly. The firm has other qualified attorneys who can handle the remaining details. Unfortunately, it's not that simple, Webb replied. You see, Ms. Chen, you've been privy to certain sensitive information during your work on this deal. Information that could be damaging if it fell into the wrong hands. Are you suggesting I would violate attorney-client privilege? I'm suggesting that people under stress sometimes make poor decisions. Your recent behavior, the missed meetings, the sudden resignation, The family crisis, it all suggests someone who might not be thinking clearly about her professional obligations. Maya felt a chill that had nothing to do with the autumn air. Webb's tone was conversational, almost friendly, but his words carried an unmistakable threat. He was suggesting that her grandmother's death and her subsequent emotional breakdown made her a security risk, someone who might compromise confidential information either deliberately or accidentally. "What exactly do you want from me?" Maya asked. "Simply an assurance that you understand the importance of discretion, that you'll honor your professional obligations and allow the Hartley acquisition to proceed without interference. And if I don't provide that assurance?" Webb's smile widened slightly. "Then we'd be forced to take steps to protect our clients' interests. Legal steps initially. Disciplinary complaints with the state bar, civil suits for breach of contract and violation of confidentiality agreements. But if those measures proved insufficient..." He shrugged eloquently. Maya stared at him, recognizing the careful language of someone accustomed to making threats without crossing the line into explicit intimidation. But the message was clear: comply or face escalating consequences that might extend well beyond her professional life. "I need time to consider this," Maya said. "Of course, but not too much time. The acquisition is scheduled to close within the next 2 weeks, and our clients are anxious to resolve any potential complications beforehand." Webb reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card, which he offered with the same pleasant smile. "My direct number. I'm available whenever you're ready to discuss terms." Maya took the card, but didn't look at it, keeping her eyes fixed on Webb's face. "Terms? Every negotiation has terms, Ms. Chen. The question is whether you prefer to discuss them voluntarily or have them imposed through less pleasant means." With that, Webb turned and walked away, leaving Maya standing beside the playground where children laughed and shouted in blissful ignorance of adult complications. She watched him disappear into the parking lot, then sat heavily on the bench she'd vacated, her legs suddenly unsteady. The conversation had clarified her situation while making it infinitely more complex. Maya had stumbled into something larger than a simple career change, had inadvertently threatened interests that commanded resources and influence far beyond anything she'd imagined. The Hartley acquisition wasn't just a business deal. It was the centerpiece of plans that involved people who wouldn't hesitate to destroy her life to protect their investment. Maya drove home in a daze, Webb's words echoing in her mind. She'd naively believed that quitting her job was the hardest part of changing her life, but now she realized it might have been the easy part. The difficult part would be surviving the consequences of that decision and finding a way to move forward without compromising everything she'd begun to value. As she pulled into her grandmother's driveway, Maya saw David's truck parked in front of the house. He was sitting on the front porch steps with Emma beside him, both of them looking concerned. "We've been waiting for you," Emma announced as Maya got out of her car. "Daddy was worried because you didn't answer your phone." Maya checked her phone and saw 3 missed calls from David, along with a text asking if she was okay. She'd been so focused on the meeting with Webb that she'd forgotten to turn the ringer back on after leaving it on silent during the park encounter. "I'm sorry," Maya said, climbing the porch steps. "I had a meeting and lost track of time." David studied her face with the focused attention she'd come to associate with his woodworking, reading subtle signs that others might miss. "Everything okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." Maya considered lying, dismissing his concerns with a casual explanation that would preserve the illusion of normalcy. But looking at David and Emma, at their open faces and genuine worry, she realized she was tired of managing information, tired of calculating what to reveal and what to conceal. "Actually, no," she said, unlocking the front door. "Everything is definitely not okay." Maya's confession came in fragments, delivered between cups of tea and Emma's periodic interruptions, as she built an elaborate fort in the living room. David listened without judgment as Maya explained about the Hartley acquisition, the anonymous email, the meeting with Marcus Webb, and the growing certainty that walking away from her corporate life had made her a target rather than simply an ex-employee. "So they think you know something that could hurt their deal," David said when she finished, his voice carefully neutral. "More than think. I do know things." Maya stared into her empty mug, weighing how much to reveal. The environmental impact reports, the worker safety violations they're trying to bury, the regulatory loopholes they're exploiting. If that information became public, it could kill the acquisition, or at least force major concessions. Emma appeared in the kitchen doorway wearing a blanket cape and carrying a wooden sword that David had made for her birthday. "Are you playing a game?" she asked, studying their serious faces. "Sort of," Maya said, managing a smile. "The kind where we have to figure out how to help the good guys win." "I'm excellent at those games," Emma declared. "Who are the bad guys?" David and Maya exchanged glances. "People who care more about money than about whether other people get hurt," Maya said carefully. Emma nodded gravely. "Those are definitely bad guys. Do you need help fighting them?" "Maybe," Maya replied. "But right now, the best help would be if you kept working on your fort while Daddy and I talk about grown-up strategy." Emma accepted this assignment with the seriousness of a general receiving orders, disappearing back into the living room with renewed focus on her construction project. "You're good with her," David observed. "She makes it easy. Kids don't complicate things the way adults do." Maya rubbed her temples, feeling the beginnings of a headache. "David, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest." "Okay. Are you having second thoughts about getting involved with someone who's apparently made enemies of very powerful people? Because if you are, I understand. This isn't what you signed up for when you pulled me out of that field." David was quiet for a long moment, and Maya braced herself for the reasonable response that would prioritize Emma's safety over Maya's emotional needs. Instead, he reached across the table and took her hand. "6 months ago, I would have said yes," he admitted. "I would have backed away and focused on keeping Emma safe from anything that might bring chaos into our lives. And now? Now I've realized that safety isn't the same thing as living. Emma and we've been treading water since her mother left, maintaining the status quo but not really moving forward. You've reminded us what it feels like to take risks for something worthwhile." Maya felt tears threaten, overwhelmed by the simple generosity of his support. "This could get dangerous. These people don't just make legal threats. Then we'll be careful, but we won't run away." The "we" in that sentence made something warm unfurl in Maya's chest, a feeling she'd almost forgotten existed. When was the last time someone had chosen to stand with her rather than calculating what her presence might cost them? "What do you think I should do?" she asked. David considered the question seriously. "Legally, what are your options?" "I could report what I know to the EPA, the Department of Labor, maybe the local prosecutors in the areas where Hartley operates. But that would definitely cross the line from uncooperative to actively hostile. Webb made it clear that they won't tolerate interference. And if you do nothing, the deal goes through, communities get poisoned, workers get hurt, and I spend the rest of my life knowing I could have prevented it." Maya shook her head. "I can't live with that." "Then you have your answer. It's not that simple. If I blow the whistle on this deal, I'll never work in corporate law again. I'll be blacklisted, sued into bankruptcy, possibly charged with ethics violations. And that's assuming they stick to legal retaliation." David leaned back in his chair, studying her with the same careful attention he gave to his woodworking projects. "Can I tell you what I think?" "Please." "I think you're still trying to find a solution that lets you do the right thing without giving up the life you've built. But maybe that life is exactly what needs to be sacrificed. The words hit Maya like a physical blow, partly because they were so accurate. She'd been looking for a way to expose Hartley's violations while somehow preserving her corporate career, maintaining her financial security, keeping one foot in each world. But David was right. The life she'd built was part of the problem. Not something worth preserving. I'm scared, Maya admitted. I've never not had a plan, never not known what my next move would be. If I do this, if I really commit to bringing down this deal, I'll be starting over with nothing but enemies and legal bills. You won't have nothing, David said quietly. You'll have Emma and me, if you want us. You'll have your integrity, and your skills and the knowledge that you chose to protect people who couldn't protect themselves. Maya looked around her grandmother's kitchen, at the worn linoleum and the outdated appliances and the photograph on the refrigerator of her grandmother, accepting a volunteer recognition award from the local food bank. Her grandmother had never earned much money, had never held prestigious positions or accumulated impressive assets. But she'd lived with purpose, had known that her actions mattered to the people around her. If I do this, Maya said slowly, I'll need to be smart about it. Webb and his clients will be watching for any sign that I'm moving against them. What would smart look like? Maya's legal mind began working through possibilities, strategies for exposing the truth while minimizing her own vulnerability. Documentation first. I need copies of everything I worked on, all the reports and analyses that show what Hartley is really doing. Then I need to find the right people to contact, journalists and regulators who can't be bought off. How long would that take? A few days, maybe a week if I'm careful about it. The tricky part is getting access to the files without tipping off the firm. David nodded thoughtfully. What about your assistant? The one who called yesterday? Stephanie? What about her? Would she help you? Or would she report back to your bosses? Maya considered the question. Stephanie had been her assistant for 3 years, had stayed late countless nights helping with urgent projects, had covered for Maya during family emergencies and personal crises. But she was also ambitious, eager to advance her own career. And loyalty to Maya might not outweigh self-preservation. I think she'd help, Maya said finally. But only if she believed she wouldn't get caught. Then maybe the question is how to make it safe for her to help you. They spent the next hour developing a plan that felt both bold and terrifying. Maya would return to Portland the following day, not to resume her position at the firm, but to collect her personal belongings and, if possible, copies of the Hartley files. She'd tell Stephanie that she was gathering materials for a possible wrongful termination lawsuit, which would give her assistant plausible cover for providing access to documents. It's not exactly legal, Maya admitted. Taking copies of client files could be considered theft of proprietary information. Is it more illegal than poisoning communities and endangering workers? No, but it could land me in jail if I'm caught. David reached across the table and squeezed her hand. Then, don't get caught. That evening, while Emma helped David prepare dinner, Maya called her cousin Sarah to arrange for someone to watch her grandmother's house while she was away. Maya, I'm worried about you, Sarah said after hearing an edited version of Maya's situation. These sound like dangerous people. They are. But what's the alternative? Pretend I don't know what I know. Let them hurt people because confronting them is risky? You could move away. Start over somewhere else, somewhere they can't find you. Maya had considered that option, but it felt like another form of surrender. Grandma didn't raise me to run away from fights that matter. Grandma didn't raise you to get yourself killed either. I'm not going to get killed. I'm going to be careful and smart and probably very lucky. Sarah sighed. I know that tone. You've made up your mind. I have. Then I'll pray for you and Maya. If you need somewhere safe to go, somewhere they wouldn't think to look, you're always welcome here. After dinner, Maya sat on the front porch with David while Emma practiced cartwheels in the yard. The evening air carried the scent of wood smoke and dying leaves, autumn settling over the valley like a comfortable blanket. "Are you sure about this?" David asked, not for the first time. "No," Maya replied honestly. "But I'm sure about what happens if I don't try." More communities poisoned, more workers hurt, more evidence that money matters more than people. And after? Assuming you succeed in stopping the deal, what then? Maya had been trying not to think too far ahead, focusing on the immediate challenge rather than the uncertain future beyond it. "I don't know. Start that rural law practice we talked about, I suppose. Help people who need legal aid but can't afford the kind of lawyers I used to be. Here? In Cedar Falls?" The question hung in the air between them, loaded with implications. About their relationship and Maya's willingness to commit to a completely different life. Moving to Cedar Falls would mean leaving behind not just her career, but her entire social and professional network. Starting over in a community where she'd always be known as the city lawyer who chose a different path. "Would you want me to?" Maya asked. "Yes," David said without hesitation. "Emma would too. But only if it's what you want, not just what you think we want to hear." Maya watched Emma practice her cartwheels, noting the little girl's determination to master a skill that seemed to have no practical purpose beyond joy. There was something pure about that kind of effort, something untainted by ambition or external validation. "I think I'd like to try," Maya said. Not just the law practice, but the whole thing. Small-town life, being part of a community instead of just working in one. David smiled, and Maya felt that now familiar flutter in her chest. "Emma's going to be thrilled. She's already planning where to put your furniture in the house. She's assuming I'll move in with you." She's 7. She believes in happy endings and assumes adults are smart enough to recognize good things when they find them. Maya laughed, charmed by Emma's optimistic pragmatism. Maybe she's right. About happy endings? About recognizing good things. They were interrupted by Emma's triumphant shout as she finally managed a complete cartwheel without falling over. Both adults applauded, and Emma took an elaborate bow before running over to join them on the porch. "Did you see? I did it perfectly." "You certainly did," Maya agreed. "How long have you been practicing?" "All summer. Daddy says the best way to learn something new is to keep trying even when it's hard." Maya glanced at David, recognizing the life lesson embedded in his. "Parenting. That's very good advice. Are you going to keep trying the hard thing you're doing?" Emma asked with the directness that only children could manage. "Yes," Maya said, surprised by the certainty in her voice. "Even though it's scary." "Good. Scary things are usually the most important ones." As they prepared for bed, Maya found herself thinking about Emma's simple wisdom. Scary things were usually the most important ones. The lightning strike had been scary, but it had led her to David and Emma and a complete reevaluation of her priorities. Quitting her job had been scary, but it had forced her to confront the emptiness of her professional success. Now taking on powerful interests who wouldn't hesitate to destroy her was scary, but it felt like the right kind of fear, the kind that accompanied meaningful action rather than meaningless advancement. Maya packed a small overnight bag and prepared for what might be her last visit to Portland as a corporate lawyer. Tomorrow she'd walk back into the world she'd rejected, not to reclaim her place in it, but to gather the tools needed to tear down something rotten and dangerous. The drive to Portland felt like traveling backward through time, each mile taking her further from the person she was becoming and closer to the person she'd been trying to leave behind. The city's skyline appeared through the morning haze, all glass and steel and upward ambition, beautiful and cold and utterly familiar. Maya parked in the garage beneath her apartment building and took the elevator to the 32nd floor, keys in hand for what might be the last time. The apartment looked exactly as she'd left it, pristine and impersonal and somehow smaller than she remembered. Had she really lived here for 3 years? Had she really thought this sterile space represented success? She packed quickly, taking Only clothes and personal items, leaving behind the expensive furniture and artwork that had cost more than many people's annual salaries. If things went badly with the Hartley situation, she might need to liquidate everything anyway to pay legal bills. The law firm occupied 15 floors of a downtown high-rise, its marble lobby designed to intimidate clients and competitors alike. Maya had once felt pride walking through that space, had seen it as evidence of her professional achievement. Now it just looked like expensive intimidation, designed to remind everyone of the power and resources at the firm's disposal. Stephanie looked up from her desk as Maya approached, her expression cycling through relief, confusion, and worry. "Maya! Thank God you're here. Mr. Brennan has been asking about you every hour since yesterday. The Hartley people are furious, and there are rumors about some kind of federal investigation." "Slow down," Maya said, settling into the chair beside Stephanie's desk. "I need your help with something, but I need to know I can trust you." Stephanie's eyes widened. "Of course you can trust me. What's going on?" Maya had rehearsed this conversation during the drive from Cedar Falls, choosing her words carefully. "To protect both of them. I think the firm might try to make me a scapegoat for the Hartley problems. I need copies of all my files on that deal, everything I worked on over the past 6 months. For a wrongful termination suit, something like that. Can you help me get access without anyone knowing?" Stephanie hesitated, clearly torn between loyalty and self-preservation. "Maya, if they catch us copying confidential files, they won't catch us if we're smart about it. And Stephanie, if this situation goes the way I think it might, having those files could protect you too. You were involved in the research, you saw the same reports I did. If someone decides to prosecute, they might not care about the difference between lawyers and assistants." That argument seemed to resonate. Stephanie nodded slowly. "What do you need me to do?" "Create a research folder, something that looks like normal case preparation. Copy everything related to the environmental studies, the safety reports, the regulatory compliance analyses. Can you do that without triggering any security protocols?" "I think so, but it'll take time to do it safely." "How much time?" "A few hours, maybe longer if I have to be subtle about accessing the files." Maya checked her watch. It was just past 9 a.m., and the office was beginning to fill with lawyers and staff starting their day. "I'll be in my office cleaning out my desk. Text me when you're ready." Maya's corner office felt like a museum exhibit of her former life, filled with diplomas and awards and photographs from bar association events that had once seemed important. She packed her personal items slowly, taking time to review each object and decide whether it belonged to the person she'd been or the person she was becoming. The view from her window encompassed half the city, a vista that had once represented the scope of her ambition. Now it just looked like distance, like the space between herself and the people whose lives were affected by the decisions made in rooms like this one. Her computer chimed with an email from Marcus Webb's office, marked urgent and flagged for immediate response. Maya's stomach clenched as she opened it, expecting another threat or ultimatum. Instead, she found something unexpected, an invitation to lunch, couched in polite language that suggested a desire to discuss mutual interests and explore collaborative solutions. The tone was diplomatic rather than threatening, as if Webb had decided that persuasion might be more effective than intimidation. Maya stared at the message, trying to decode its real meaning. Was this a genuine attempt at negotiation or another form of manipulation? Did Webb think she could be bought, or was he simply trying to gauge her intentions before escalating to more serious threats? Her phone buzzed with a text from Stephanie. "Package ready for pickup. Storage room B12. Maya deleted Webb's email without responding and made her way to the storage room, where Stephanie had left a thick manila envelope taped under one of the filing cabinets. The weight of it surprised her, hundreds of pages of documents that told the complete story of Hartley Industries' environmental and safety violations. Back in her office, Maya quickly scanned through the materials, her anger building as she reviewed the scope of the company's misconduct. Contaminated groundwater in 3 states. Lung disease rates among workers that exceeded industry averages by 300%. Regulatory violations that had been settled quietly rather than prosecuted publicly. The most damning document was a risk assessment that Hartley's own consultants had prepared, calculating the cost of implementing proper safety measures versus the expected cost of lawsuit settlements and regulatory fines. The company had explicitly chosen to accept worker injuries and environmental damage because the financial penalties were lower than the cost of prevention. Maya photographed each page with her phone, creating digital copies that would be harder to trace than physical documents. If Webb or his clients discovered what she'd taken, they'd assume she had only paper copies that could be destroyed or suppressed through legal action. As she prepared to leave the office for the last time, Maya's computer chimed with another email, this one from Richard Brennan himself. The subject line read "Final Warning," and the message was brief and unambiguous. Return to work immediately, or face immediate termination and disciplinary action. The choice is yours. Maya typed her response quickly, not wanting to lose her nerve. Mr. Brennan, I resign my position effective immediately. Please process my final paycheck and benefits according to firm policy. I will not be returning to the office. She hit send before she could second-guess herself, then gathered her boxes and walked out of her corner office without looking back. The elevator ride to the parking garage felt like descending from one world into another, each floor taking her further from the life she'd built and closer to the uncertain future she'd chosen. As Maya loaded her car with the remnants of her corporate career, her phone rang with a call from an unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her swipe to accept. Ms. Chen? This is Detective Lisa Rodriguez with the Portland Police Bureau. I need to speak with you about a case I'm working on. Are you available to meet this afternoon? Maya's blood ran cold. Had Webb already moved to have her arrested? Was this about the stolen documents or something else entirely? What kind of case? Maya asked, trying to keep her voice steady. I'd prefer to discuss it in person. Can you come to the downtown precinct around 2 p.m.? Am I under investigation for something? Not at this time. But I have some questions about activities at your former law firm that might relate to an ongoing federal probe. The words hit Maya like lightning, not the destructive kind that had knocked her unconscious, but the illuminating kind that suddenly made everything clear. She wasn't the only one who'd noticed something wrong with the Hartley deal. Someone else was investigating, someone with the authority to do something about it. I'll be there, Maya said, then ended the call and sat in her car for several minutes, trying to process this unexpected development. The drive back to Cedar Falls felt different this time, not like retreat, but like advancement towards something better. Maya had the documents she needed, had severed her ties with the firm, and now discovered that she might not be fighting alone against impossible odds. As she crested the hill that led down into the valley where David and Emma waited, Maya felt something she hadn't experienced in years, hope that justice might actually be possible, that doing the right thing might not require sacrificing everything she'd begun to care about. Her phone buzzed with a text from David. Emma wants to know if you're bringing dinner or if we should start cooking. She votes for pizza. Maya smiled and typed back, "Pizza sounds perfect. I have news, good news or bad news. Both, but I think the good might outweigh the bad. Can't wait to hear it. Drive safe." Maya accelerated slightly, eager to return to the place that had somehow become home, to the people who'd chosen to stand with her against whatever came next. The future was still uncertain, still dangerous, but for the first time since the lightning strike, she felt like she was moving towards something worth the risk. 6 months later, Maya stood in the doorway of what would soon become Cedar Falls' first legal aid clinic. watching David install the final piece of built-in shelving. Sunlight streamed through the windows he'd enlarged, illuminating the warm wood furniture he'd crafted specifically for the space. Every piece was designed for function and comfort. Chairs that invited confidential conversations and desks that encouraged collaboration rather than intimidation. "What do you think?" David asked, stepping back to admire his handiwork. "Perfect," Maya replied, meaning it completely. The clinic bore no resemblance to the marble and steel intimidation of her former workplace. This was a space built for healing rather than conquest, for justice rather than profit. Emma burst through the front door, her school backpack flying as she launched herself at Maya with characteristic enthusiasm. "Did you see? Daddy put up the sign." Maya stepped outside to look at the modest wooden sign David had carved by hand. Cedar Falls Legal Clinic, Maya Chen, attorney at law, equal justice under law. Below it, in Emma's careful 7-year-old printing, someone had added, "And Emma Morrison, assistant helper." "I didn't authorize that addition," Maya said. Trying to look stern, "I did," David replied with a grin. She negotiated hard for the position. The months since Maya's meeting with Detective Rodriguez had unfolded like the resolution to a complex legal case, each piece of evidence clicking into place until the complete picture emerged. The federal investigation into Hartley Industries had been ongoing for nearly a year, triggered by whistleblower complaints from former employees. Maya's documentation had provided the final pieces needed to build an airtight case. The arrests had made national headlines. Hartley's executives faced criminal charges for environmental violations, worker endangerment, and conspiracy to defraud. Federal regulators, Marcus Webb and 2 other attorneys, were under investigation for obstruction of justice. Richard Brennan had been quietly forced to resign from his firm, his reputation destroyed by association with the conspiracy. Maya's role in exposing the truth had initially made her a target for retaliation, but federal protection and the public nature of the case had ultimately provided safety through visibility. The threats had ceased once it became clear that silencing her would no longer protect anyone's interests. The legal victory had opened doors Maya hadn't expected. A foundation focused on rural justice had offered funding for the clinic, impressed by her willingness to sacrifice a lucrative career for principle. The Oregon State Bar had featured her story in their ethics publication, holding her up as an example of attorney integrity. Law students from Portland State drove out regularly to volunteer, eager to learn from someone who'd chosen purpose over profit. But the professional recognition, satisfying as it was, paled beside the personal transformation Maya had experienced. She woke each morning in the small house she now shared with David and Emma, to the sound of birdsong rather than traffic, to the smell of coffee and pancakes rather than exhaust and ambition. Her days were filled with cases that mattered, helping a disabled veteran secure benefits, assisting immigrant families with documentation, mediating landlord disputes for elderly residents on fixed incomes. "Maya," Emma called from inside the clinic. "Mrs. Patterson is here with cookies." Eleanor Patterson, who ran the town's general store, had appointed herself unofficial welcoming committee for Maya's arrival in Cedar Falls. She'd appeared regularly over the past months with baked goods, community gossip, and gentle advice about navigating small-town social dynamics. "I brought snickerdoodles," Mrs. Patterson announced, setting a plate on Maya's new desk. "And the latest news from the county commissioners' meeting. They're finally going to fix that pothole on Maple Street." Maya had learned that local politics in Cedar Falls moved at a different pace than corporate negotiations, but with no less passion. The debate over the Maple Street pothole had raged for months, involving detailed discussions of budget allocations, traffic patterns, and the historical significance of maintaining original brick paving. "Any word on the new playground equipment?" David asked, accepting a cookie. Approved unanimously. Maya's presentation to the council about liability issues really helped. Amazing what happens when you explain legal requirements in plain English. instead of lawyer talk. Maya smiled, remembering her first town council meeting. She'd been nervous about inserting herself into local politics, but the playground project had needed legal review, and she'd wanted to contribute something meaningful to the community that had embraced her. Speaking of legal matters, Mrs. Patterson continued with the casual tone that always preceded important information. The Henderson are having trouble with their landlord again. Something about claiming their medical equipment violates the lease. Maya made a mental note to call the Hendersons. John Henderson was a retired logger dealing with chronic pain from a back injury, and his wife Sarah provided home care that required specialized equipment. If their landlord was threatening eviction over disability accommodations, Maya would have grounds for a federal civil rights complaint. "I'll handle it," Maya said. "I knew you would. That's why we're all so glad you decided to stay." After Mrs. Patterson left, Maya and David finished setting up the clinic while Emma practiced her reading in the children's corner they'd created. The space was small but efficiently designed, with a private consultation room, a law library stocked with donated books, and a waiting area that felt more like a living room than a medical office. "Nervous about tomorrow?" David asked as they locked up for the evening. Tomorrow was the clinic's official opening, marked by a ribbon-cutting ceremony that would attract local media and visiting dignitaries. Maya had been interviewed by the Faya regional newspaper, photographed for a magazine article about rural legal services, and invited to speak at the State Bar Convention about her transition from corporate law to community practice. "A little," Maya admitted. "It feels surreal that something that started with getting struck by lightning has led to this." "Not lightning," David corrected. "Courage. The lightning just knocked you down long enough to hear what your conscience was trying to tell you." They walked home through streets Maya now knew by heart, past houses where she'd been invited for dinner, gardens she'd admired, neighbors who waved and called her by name. The transition from anonymous city dweller to small-town resident had been easier than she'd expected, partly because Cedar Falls excelled at making newcomers feel welcomed, but mostly because she'd finally found a place where her daily work aligned with her deepest values. "Maya," Emma said as they reached their front porch, "are you happy?" The question, delivered with characteristic directness, made Maya pause to consider her answer seriously. Was she happy? Her income was a fraction of what she'd earned at Brennan Associates. Her apartment had been replaced by a rented house, with creaky floors and outdated plumbing. Her designer wardrobe had given way to practical clothes suitable for small-town life. But she woke up each morning, eager to start her day rather than dreading another round of meaningless transactions. She knew her neighbors' names and their stories. She had work that mattered and people who loved her for who she was rather than what she could produce. "Yes," Maya said, scooping Emma into a hug. "I'm very happy." "Good, Daddy is too." He smiles more now. That evening, as David tucked Emma into bed and Maya reviewed case files for the next day, her phone rang with a call from Sarah. "I saw the article in the Oregonian," her cousin said. "You look good in the photo, relaxed." "I feel relaxed most of the time." "Any regrets about walking away from the partnership track?" Maya looked around the living room of the house she now shared with David and Emma, at the mismatched furniture that had been assembled from yard sales and family donations, at the children's books scattered on coffee tables, at the evidence of a life being lived rather than simply managed. "None," she said honestly. "Well, maybe one small regret." "What's that?" "That it took getting struck by lightning to wake me up to what I really wanted," Sarah laughed. "Grandma always said you were stubborn. Sometimes the universe has to use dramatic methods to get your attention." After hanging up, Maya found David on the back porch, enjoying the clear evening air and the view of stars unobscured by city lights. She settled beside him on the swing he'd built, tucking her feet underneath her. "Thinking about tomorrow?" she asked. "Actually, I was." Thinking about a year from now, 2 years. What this place might look like when you've had time to really build something. Maya had been thinking about the future too, about the cases she hoped to take on, the legal precedents she might establish for rural communities, the law students she could mentor in practicing with purpose rather than just profit. I have an idea, she said. Something I wanted to run by you. I'm listening. What if we expanded? Not just the legal clinic, but the whole concept. A community resource center that combines legal aid with other services people need. Job training, financial counseling, childcare during appointments. David turned to look at her, eyebrows raised. That's ambitious. I know it sounds crazy. But think about it. Most people's problems aren't just legal. They're complicated tangles of issues that require different kinds of expertise. What if we created a place where they could get help with all of it? Where would we put something like that? The old lumber mill. It's been empty for 5 years, but the bones are good. With some renovation, it could house multiple services under one roof. David was quiet for several minutes, and Maya could practically see him mentally measuring spaces and calculating structural requirements. It would take significant funding, he said finally. I've been researching grants. Rural development funds, foundation money, maybe even some federal support. If we design it right, and you'd want to run this place? We'd want to run it. Together, you'd handle the physical infrastructure. I'd manage the legal and administrative side. Equal partners in something that could really change how rural communities access support services. David smiled, and Maya recognized the expression she'd learned to associate with his acceptance of ambitious projects. Emma would insist on an official title, he said. Chief Morale Officer? She'd probably negotiate for Vice President of important decisions. They sat in comfortable silence, swinging gently and watching fireflies begin their evening dance. Among the trees, Maya still felt amazed sometimes at how completely her life had changed, how the person she'd been a year ago would barely recognize the woman she'd become. Her phone buzzed with a text message, interrupting her reverie. The sender was listed as Portland General Hospital, and Maya's heart skipped as she read the message. Miss Chen, you have been selected to receive this year's Community Service Award for your work in rural legal advocacy. The ceremony is next month. Please call to confirm your attendance. What is it? David asked, noticing her expression. Apparently I'm getting an award for community service. From the same hospital where they treated me after the lightning strike. That's wonderful. You should be proud. It feels strange. Like they're honoring someone else. Someone who planned to do all this instead of just stumbling into it. Maybe that's the point. Maybe the best things happen when we stop planning every detail and start responding to what life puts in front of us. Maya leaned against David's shoulder, solid and warm and reassuring. A year ago, if someone had told her she'd be living in a small Oregon town, practicing rural law, and planning to renovate an abandoned lumber mill, she'd have thought they were describing someone else's life entirely. But now, watching stars appear in the clear country sky, surrounded by the quiet sounds of a community settling into evening, Maya couldn't imagine wanting to be anywhere else. The lightning strike had knocked her unconscious for 10 minutes. But it had taken 6 months to fully wake up to the life she was meant to be living. David, she said quietly, thank you. For stopping that night, for taking me in, for believing I could become someone better than who I was. Thank you for letting me. For showing Emma and me what it looks like to choose courage over comfort. Emma's voice drifted down from her upstairs window, where she was supposed to be sleeping, but was clearly eavesdropping on their conversation. Are you two getting mushy again? Because that's gross, but also kind of nice. Maya and David looked at each other and burst into laughter, the sound carrying across the quiet neighborhood, like a promise that some stories really do have happy endings. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If This one hit the mark. You won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.